So the year is 260 AD, and deep inside a Roman mint, there's this imperial official who makes a really quiet, seemingly insignificant decision.
Okay.
He basically takes the silver that's needed to mint the empire's currency, the denarius, and he secretly mixes in a handful of cheap copper.
Wait, like counterfeiting their own money?
Exactly. He's just trying to stretch the budget, trying to balance the books for a government that is completely bleeding cash. And it feels like a minor adjustment. But in reality, he's basically pulling out a Jenga block.
Oh, man, I love that game. But yeah, you pull the wrong one and it's game over.
Right. Think about how Jenga works. You pull out one wooden block at a time. And for a long time, the tower looks perfectly fine. I mean, it stands tall, it looks invincible.
You always think you can get away with just one more block.
Exactly. You think you can keep pulling them forever, but eventually you pull that one final tiny block, and the whole thing just comes crashing down in seconds.
And everybody jumps.
Right. People watching usually gasp and they think the crash was sudden. But the truth is, the instability was building for hours. The final collapse was just the ultimate symptom of a structure that had been completely hollowed out from the inside. And when we look at the collapse of history's greatest empires, well, it works exactly the same way.
Everything they forgot to teach you.
Welcome to the Missing Lessons, where we explain what school never did.
So glad to be here for this one.
Today, we are exploring exactly why empires collapse. We're looking at these massive, seemingly invincible superpowers of the past and unpacking the invisible mechanisms that turn them to dust.
And this isn't just a history lesson.
No, not at all. This is a masterclass in human behavior, economics, and survival. It directly dictates how our modern world operates today.
If you're enjoying the Missing Lessons, make sure to follow the podcast, leave a rating, and share it with someone who might find it interesting. It helps us create more episodes and reach more curious minds.
So to really get into this, we have to start by completely destroying a popular myth.
I love destroying myths. Which one?
Well, when we think about the fall of an empire, especially Rome, pop culture hands us this very specific cinematic image. We picture dramatic, violent invasions.
Oh, yeah, like the barbarians literally breaking down the giant wooden gates, swinging swords, setting all the monuments on fire.
Exactly. We naturally want to blame the collapse on that massive outside force, but the reality is that empires, they almost never collapse overnight, and they rarely fall simply because of a sudden invasion.
So what actually takes them down?
They succumb to a slow, terminal internal rot. It's that Jenga tower hollowed out from the inside.
Makes sense.
To really understand this mechanism, you have to look at the two fundamental pillars that determine the health of any organized society. And these two concepts are cost and cohesion.
Cost and cohesion. Okay, break those down for me.
So cost is just the sheer resource burden of governing and defending a massive territory. It's the money, the food, the infrastructure, and the manpower you need just to keep the lights on and the borders secure.
Right. It's not cheap to run a giant empire.
Not at all. And cohesion, on the other hand, is the invisible glue. It's the sense of unity holding the people together. It's the shared belief in the system, the mutual trust between the rulers and the people being ruled.
So it's basically what makes everyday citizens actually care about whether the state survives or not.
Exactly.
But hold on, if we're talking about massive, sprawling empires, societies that build wonders of the world and field armies of hundreds of thousands of people, how do they even afford that astronomical cost to begin with?
That is the big question.
Because before the rot sets in, there has to be some massive engine generating all of that wealth, right?
Yeah, and that engine is the foundation of every complex society that has ever existed. It all comes down to a structural concept called surplus extraction.
Surplus extraction. Sounds a bit intense.
It is, but it's really simple. If you look at a very primitive hunter-gatherer society, everyone works just to feed themselves. There's no extra food at the end of the day.
You eat what you catch.
Right. But once a society organizes and develops agriculture, everyday producers, like the farmers, the laborers, they begin to produce more than they strictly need for their own immediate survival.
Okay, so they have leftovers.
Exactly. That extra grain, that extra labor, is the surplus. And the elites of the society, the administrators, the warriors, the priests, they extract that surplus. They take a cut.
Which, to be fair, isn't inherently evil, is it? It's essentially a trade-off.
Oh, definitely. It's a social contract.
Right, because the elites are taking that surplus, but they are organizing society in a way a single farmer just couldn't.
Exactly. They use it to fund a professional military that keeps invaders away. They build courts to settle disputes, they construct roads, aqueducts, you name it.
It's basically the cost of doing business as a civilization.
Precisely. You can see this exact same dynamic functioning in a modern workplace today.
How so?
Think about it. You are the worker. You're generating value. The business owner takes a cut of the profits generated by your daily labor, and they use that cut to pay for the office building, the marketing, the software licenses, and the management structure that organizes the whole operation.
Oh, yeah, that makes total sense.
Right. When it works, it's a beautifully balanced system. Both sides benefit. The crisis only begins when that balance gets thrown off. And that leads us to the first major phase of imperial collapse.
The Jenga block gets pulled.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's what happens when extraction devolves into greedy exploitation. Let's call it the parasite problem.
That does not sound good.
It's not. Once an extraction system is highly optimized, the elites face this overwhelming temptation to just take more. They become totally detached from the reality of the workers.
They lose touch with the people actually making the surplus.
Right. They begin to view unlimited wealth and comfort not as a trade-off for their leadership, but as their absolute right. So they start hoarding resources.
Yeah.
While the real wages, the purchasing power, and the living standards of the working majority begin to drastically decline.
And this is where the math of a society just completely breaks down, right?
Right.
Because if the workers, the ones actually making the goods and farming the food, are squeezed so hard that they can no longer afford to buy the very products they are making, the entire economic engine just stalls out.
You hit the nail on the head, you destroy the middle class, consumer demand plummets, and you trigger a permanent economic depression.
Wow, it's a vicious cycle.
It really is. And you can see this vividly throughout time. Picture the staggering extreme of elite extravagance in the Roman Empire during its decline.
Like crazy parties and palaces.
Worse, you had senators and emperors building massive, sprawling palace estates on private islands. They were importing exotic foods from across the known world, just living in this bubble of unimaginable luxury.
And everyone else was struggling, I imagine.
Striving just to survive. The urban poor in Rome were completely reliant on state grain handouts just to avoid dying of starvation in the streets.
That is a massive disconnect.
Fast forward centuries later to a completely different economic system, the Soviet Union before its collapse.
Totally different ideology, but same problem.
Exact same problem. The elites there, the high-ranking party bosses, they had exclusive access to hidden private shops stocked with imported luxury goods.
Oh, in shops. Wait, really?
Yeah, secret stores just for them. They enjoyed private hunting estates, gated social clubs, pristine special hospitals.
Oh, wow.
Meanwhile, the general public was literally standing in line for hours in the freezing cold just to buy a basic loaf of bread or a pair of boots.
Which completely destroys that second pillar we talked about, right? Cohesion.
Yes, exactly.
Because when regular citizens look around and realize the elites only care about their own localized selfish interests, the social contract is broken. I mean, why would you work hard or pay taxes or risk your life to support a state that clearly views you as disposable?
You wouldn't. Morale completely sinks. You see chronic absenteeism at work. People just stop caring. And eventually, the public becomes entirely indifferent to whether the government survives or falls.
They just check out.
They do. If the so-called barbarians are at the gates, but the citizens inside the gates absolutely despise their own leaders, they aren't going to fight. They might even open the gates themselves just to see the elites get what's coming to them.
That is so wild to think about. It's like, just come on in. We hate our boss anyway.
Right, exactly. That indifference is the fatal symptom of internal rot. But there is another massive structural force that accelerates this whole process, and that is the problem of geographical and military size.
Getting too big.
Put simply, empires get too big to govern. It's the trap of imperial overstretch. Empires inherently want to expand. They conquered a neighboring territory to secure their borders, but then, well, that new territory has borders that need defending.
So they just have to conquer the next one.
Exactly. Eventually, you are trying to defend sprawling, massive frontiers and maintain military bases all over the known world. The sheer logistical cost of moving troops, sending messages, and shipping food across thousands of miles, it just bleeds the state dry.
Okay, so you have a government that is bleeding cash to defend impossible borders, but their tax base is already tapped out because the working class has been squeezed dry by the elites.
Yes.
I'm guessing this is the exact moment where governments start doing incredibly sketchy things with their money to hide the deficit.
Oh, absolutely. It's pure desperation. When an empire cannot afford its military, but sending the soldiers home means losing the borders, they start messing with the money. They literally ruin their own currency.
Okay, now we are back to that official in the Roman mint from the beginning.
Full circle. Rome's silver coin, the denarius, was originally almost pure silver. It had real intrinsic value. But as military costs skyrocketed and the silver mines ran low, the government needed more coins than they had silver.
So they just faked it.
They did. They started secretly mixing cheap base metals, like copper and bronze, into the silver supply. And over a few centuries, the denarius went from being nearly pure silver to containing barely 5% silver.
5%? That is insane. It was essentially state-sponsored counterfeiting.
It really was. But you can't trick the market forever. Everyday people aren't stupid. When the merchants realized the coins were mostly cheap copper, they just demanded more coins for a sack of grain or a pair of shoes.
Supply and demand.
Right. And this triggered a devastating spiral of hyperinflation. Prices went through the roof. People lost so much faith in the official currency that the economy was literally forced underground, reverting to simple bartering.
That is fascinating, especially how relevant that is to our daily lives right now. I mean, when heavy inflation hits a modern economy, it is the exact same mechanism at play.
Oh, 100%.
And it's always the students, the everyday workers, and the young families who suffer the most. When everyday items suddenly cost twice as much, your hard-earned savings lose their value overnight.
Exactly. Regular people are forced into deep, crushing debt just to pay for groceries and rent, while the very wealthy usually have their assets tied up in real estate or stocks that just rise with inflation anyway.
It perfectly mirrors the exact economic strain that shattered the everyday citizens of ancient Rome.
The script doesn't change, just the actors. And here is where we tie these threads together. It's only after all of this internal rot sets in, the massive wealth inequality, the loss of cohesion, the hyperinflation, the overstretched borders, it's only then that external enemies finally succeed.
So the invasions are just the final push.
The final Jenga block. The fatal blow for Rome wasn't a sudden surprise attack on the capital. The true tipping point happened in 439 AD. Rome lost the province of Carthage, which is located in North Africa, to an invading Germanic tribe called the Vandals.
Okay, but why did losing one province matter so much? Rome was huge.
Because Carthage was the breadbasket of the empire. It supplied the crucial grain shipments and massive tax revenues that basically kept the Western Empire afloat.
Oh, wow. So they lost their main source of income.
Exactly. Because Rome was already hollowed out financially, losing Carthage meant they suddenly had zero money left to pay the army. And without an army being paid to stand guard, other Germanic tribes didn't even have to fight massive battles.
They just walked right in.
Basically, they simply migrated across the borders, settled down, and took over. The tower finally fell because the internal blocks of cost and cohesion had already been removed.
So Rome fell because it fundamentally couldn't afford its military anymore. But what happens when an empire actually has the resources, but its institutions just refuse to acknowledge a changing world? Because there are plenty of historical giants that simply refuse to adapt, right?
Yes, that is the other great killer of empires, the arrogant failure to modernize.
Arrogance is a dangerous thing.
It is. Look at the Qing dynasty in China. For centuries, they were a staggering global superpower, a marvel of administration and wealth. But they suffered from what historians sometimes call a Middle Kingdom mindset.
What does that mean?
They believed they were the absolute center of the civilized world, and that outsiders had nothing of value to offer.
Oh.
Yeah. So when the Western world began to rapidly industrialize, the Qing elite just looked inward. They ignored the technological shifts happening globally.
That's a huge mistake.
A fatal one. When conflict finally arrived, they were trying to fight against modernized foreign militaries, wielding advanced artillery and repeating firearms. And they were using traditional swords, spears, and outdated tactics.
Swords against guns. That's awful.
It wasn't just a military defeat, it was a brutal, catastrophic mismatch, born purely out of cultural complacency.
Man.
You see a similar failure to adapt in the Ottoman Empire, but for totally different structural reasons.
So?
Well, the Ottomans survived for over 6 centuries, but their demise was largely accelerated by a severe systemic deficit in human capital. And the mechanism behind this is fascinating.
Okay, tell me.
For nearly 300 years, the Ottoman religious and political establishment actively banned the use of the printing press for Arabic script.
Banned the printing press. Why?
They wanted to maintain strict control over religious texts and intellectual discourse. But by missing out on the information revolution brought by the printing press, they absolutely crippled their secular education.
So nobody was reading.
Very few. By the year 1914, right as the complex, mechanized 20th century was taking shape, only about 5 to 10% of the Ottoman population could read or write.
5 to 10%. Wow.
Yeah, they literally did not have the educated professionals, the engineers, or the modern administrators required to run an industrial state. They fell behind because they artificially restricted their own people's minds.
That is tragic.
It is. And sometimes, this failure to adapt and maintain cohesion means the final blow doesn't come from a foreign army at all. It comes from within.
Like a civil war.
Or a revolution. Take the Abyssinian Empire, located in modern-day Ethiopia. This was an incredibly old, proud empire with really deep roots, but it collapsed entirely in 1974.
That recently.
Yeah, and not from invasion, but from a military and popular revolution. The society had remained highly feudal and archaic, governed by a rigid aristocracy that just ignored the massive famines and modernization demands of its people.
The people just had enough.
Exactly. The internal pressure grew so intense that the system just blew the lid off. The people inside the empire tore the structure down themselves.
You know, listening to this, it's impossible not to see the parallels to a massive legacy corporate business today.
Oh, definitely.
It's the classic blockbuster video dynamic. You have these giant companies that dominate their market for decades. They become a total monopoly, but then they get comfortable.
They refuse to adapt.
Exactly. They refuse to adapt to new technology, they ignore changing consumer habits, and they assume they will always be on top. They hoard profits at the executive level, their ground-level workers get disillusioned, and eventually a smaller, faster, more adaptable startup just takes them out.
And the executives are always shocked.
Always. But the rot was building for years, the world moves on, and they are left behind.
That dynamic of human behavior, it scales perfectly. Whether you are running an ancient empire or a modern tech giant, it's the exact same forces. But this raises a really crucial question. When this collapse happens, what actually comes next?
Because we tend to view collapse as the apocalypse, right? Like, is a collapse always a permanent dark age? Does the fall of an empire mean the end of human progress in that region for centuries?
It rarely is a permanent dark age, actually. And if we step outside of the Eurocentric view and look at Mesoamerican societies like the Maya civilization or the massive ancient city of Teotihuacan, we see a totally different perspective on collapse.
What was their perspective?
In Mesoamerica, collapse was often part of a natural cycle of renewal. When a ruling system in these cities became too rigid, too corrupt, or environmentally overtaxed its surroundings, the political structure would indeed collapse.
The system breaks.
Right. The elites would lose their power, the massive ceremonial monuments would stop being built, and the capital would be abandoned. But the everyday people didn't just vanish into thin air.
What did they do?
They adapted. They essentially voted with their feet. They migrated away from the corrupt centers, formed new, smaller communities, and this allowed for rapid regrowth and cultural restructuring.
Wow, so they just walked away from the broken system.
Exactly. The fall of an oppressive center allowed more dynamic, sustainable cities to flourish. So, collapse isn't always the end of the world. Very often, it's like a forest fire. It destroys the dead wood of a broken, unsustainable system so new growth can finally reach the sunlight.
That is a really hopeful way to look at it, honestly.
And this is where we can take these massive macroeconomic principles and observe how they apply to the micro level of our own lives. Because human nature doesn't change, and you, the listener, are navigating your own world of costs, cohesion, and adaptation every single day.
So how do we avoid our own personal collapse?
Well, first, there's the concept of managing your personal overstretch. Empires fall when they expand their commitments beyond what their resources can actually maintain.
We definitely do that as people.
All the time. In daily life, we see this when people take on overwhelming financial debt just to maintain a certain lifestyle, or when they commit to more projects and social obligations than their time and mental health can actually handle.
We've all been there.
Right?
Right.
When you overstretch your personal logistics, your infrastructure breaks down. You burn out.
And then there's the adaptation piece, right? The world is clearly changing faster than it ever has before. If we assume the skills we have today will be enough to carry us through the next 30 years, we fall into the exact same trap of complacency as the Qing dynasty.
Exactly. The refusal to learn, to upskill, and to stay curious in a changing economy is a guaranteed path to becoming obsolete.
You have to keep learning.
Always. And finally, there's the concept of cohesion. The ancient Greeks had a core philosophy for a successful life and society, and it was simply nothing in excess. Exactly. We see this in how we manage our relationships. Your personal network, your family, your friends, your colleagues, that is your cohesion. If you act like an exploitative elite in your own life, extracting favors, time, and energy from the people around you without giving back, you destroy that cohesion,
They will definitely lose faith in you.
just like citizens losing faith in a corrupt state.
So if we pull all of this together, the grand takeaway is that massive systems rarely fall to sudden surprise attacks. They rot from the inside out.
Yep.
They collapse through elite greed and the destruction of the working class. They fall by ruining their own economies, overstretching their borders, and stubbornly refusing to adapt to a changing reality.
Which brings us directly to you, the listener. We've explored the historical patterns today, but these forces are actively shaping our present right now.
They really are.
Here's a question for you. What's one sign of internal rot or a failure to adapt that you've noticed in a modern business, industry, or organization you interact with?
Oh, that's a good one.
The signs are everywhere if you know what to look for. Let us know your thoughts in the comments.
I can't wait to read those.
And I want to leave you with a final thought that builds on everything we've unpacked today. Something that historians are really just starting to grapple with.
Okay, lay it on us.
For thousands of years, empires relied on physical centralization. You had a capital city, a central bank, a singular emperor. And as we've seen, that centralization creates a single point of failure.
Right. If Rome falls, the empire falls.
Exactly. But look at the modern world. We are building empires of decentralization. The internet, global supply chains, decentralized finance. We exist in a digital empire without a single physical capital to sack.
That's true.
So does this decentralization make our modern world immune to the traditional cycles of collapse? Or, by connecting us all to the exact same digital nervous system, have we just ensured that when the rot finally sets in, the entire global Jenga tower will fall at exactly the same time?
Wow. That is terrifying, but it makes so much sense.
It's definitely something to think about.
If you enjoyed this episode of The Missing Lessons, don't forget to follow the podcast, leave a rating, and share it with a friend. Your support helps us continue exploring the topics school never taught us.